Things have never been more interesting when it comes to the Uber and Lyft battle. Uber shares fall as fears over Lyft's pricing eclipse first operating profit. Now, this article was written, I think, 33 minutes ago, at least at the exact time of this video, so I timed it perfectly. And this is kind of unique because Uber stock's been doing very, very well compared to Lyft's. However, Uber shares fell 6% on today, or Tuesday, after the ride-hailing company warned Lyft was competing effectively on prices and set an earnings forecast that analysts said may have disappointed investors who have driven up the stock twofold this year. The comments and an easing pace of revenue growth overshadowed the 14-year-old Uber's first ever quarterly operating profit. So first off, Uber's been doing pretty well, give or take, but this is really interesting that Lyft has taken some tough actions. They're competitive in pricing now. And this could have a huge effect down the road. I've talked a lot about David Risher, all these things he's doing. The Uber CEO called Lyft a quote-unquote tough competitor. I got to say, love him or hate him, David Risher, the new CEO of Lyft, has been doing, I think, an excellent job. So let's talk about the prices, because this is something I've noticed too. I've noticed that recently when I've gone out, because obviously I take Ubers and Lyfts all the time, Lyft almost, I think every single time has been not only cheaper than Uber, but substantially cheaper. I'm actually in East Augmenta right now. I'm traveling for the next 3 weeks, so I'm not going to be posting as many videos as I normally do. But anyway, when I was going to the airport, I think Uber was $45. Lyft was 6. 26 versus 45, that's not like a few dollar difference. That's a lot. And you can see here that looking at this graph, the average Uber, if you look at like UberX or Uber Standard and Lyft Standard, that's about $1 difference. But I gotta say, I think over time, especially since this looks like April, let's say this is May-ish, and right now we're in August, I'd say in the past couple months, I guarantee if I had to guess, the spread has gotten more and more polarizing, which is really interesting. Now, granted, Uber's revenue rose 14% on the second quarter. That came in slightly below estimates. So I guess they were expecting to make more money. They only made $9.23 billion, but the rate of growth more than halved from the near 29% increase. So basically, Uber's still doing well, but it seems like that rate of the growth is slowing a bit. But I don't know. It's tough to say exactly, because I feel like when it comes to looking at the Uber and Lyft statistics, sometimes you have to take certain things with a grain of salt. Like drivers for Uber's rideshare business grew by 33% from a year earlier, right? Now let's look at the Uber shares. There's a lot of technical stuff here, but I think just looking at the graph, you can see that Uber shares and people investing in Uber has gotten a lot bigger. This is a sign that Uber's continuing to grow a lot. I've seen a lot of reports recently, let's say, about Uber Freight, which is their new kind of truck driving service they're kind of exploring. Uber's been doing so many new features. I've talked about them a lot. Uber Charter, Uber Parking, Uber Explorer, the list goes on and on. And then we look at Lyft. Seems like it's growing a little bit, right, from May-ish till now. So it's slowly going back up. But, if you look at this spread right here, that is gigantic. I got to be honest, there's obviously a lot going on with Uber and Lyft. I've done so many videos kind of talking about the Uber versus Lyft battle, which is interesting. If you think about that, when I first started doing videos on this channel, I never really talked about Uber versus Lyft, except when it came to the earnings. Like, do you make more money with Uber or Lyft? Which one's the better app to drive for? It was more of the driver side of things in terms of, how much money could you make, and all comes down to the dollars in your pocket. Now, though, you may have noticed in the past year, I will do, I think like a year ago-ish, I did a video this Uber versus Lyft battle is getting more interesting. Like, there never used to be this drama with Uber versus Lyft. Now there seems to be. And then over time, things have been ramping up more and more of me talking about how Uber has been doing so well, Lyft not as much. I talked about this last year a lot. And then earlier this year, I was like, things are looking kind of iffy. And then obviously the new CEO got hired, David Risher. So things are looking pretty well. And this is the first article I've seen, I think maybe a year or so, talking about how, although Uber's been doing pretty well, and this has been a good time to invest in Uber when it comes to Uber shares, and Uber's been doing well, it's the first time I've seen Uber, especially with that quote from the CEO and other analysts, start to say wow, Uber's doing well, but Lyft is slowly starting to catch up. And I think when it comes to the the prices of Lyfts being cheaper, it does kind of create this unique thing because on one end, some investors I've seen have said, hey, Uber has been doing well. Continue to invest in Uber. Uber's been doing incredibly well. And especially as you can imagine, the better Uber does, hopefully, this translates a lot better for drivers. However, I've seen some analysts say, like say on the other end when it comes to Lyft, saying, well, Lyft is doing a lot better. So maybe you should start looking at Lyft because, as the Uber CEO said now, Lyft is starting to become a legitimate competitor. When before, I think Uber probably kind of felt like, oh, we're in the lead by far. We don't need to think about Lyft. We're fine. Now, Uber, I think for the first time is saying, wow, Lyft is, if you look at tortoise versus the hare, slowly starting to pick up some steam and starting to do very, very well. On the other end, though, again, looking at everything, I have seen some articles and some analysts say, yeah, that makes sense. But here's the tricky thing. If Lyft continues to give cheaper rides than Uber, how long is that sustainable, right? I mean, of course, they might not be making as much money per ride compared to Uber, which makes sense. But you never know. I mean, it's kind of like business or economics 101. If you charge a lot for a product, if you only sell a few of them, you start making a good amount of profit. However, if you charge a little bit for a product, yeah, maybe you're not making that much per product sold. But if you sell tons of them, you might make more money than if you charged a lot and sold less, right? And I think that with all this kind of math going on, with all the shares, all these analysis reports, you may be wondering as a driver, what should I do? Being honest, I think right now, and I said this before in other videos, I don't think there's been, especially in the past year or so, it's tough to say, I don't think there's been a better time, at least right now, to start driving for Lyft more and see how it goes. I think the main reason why is there's so much going on with Lyft, especially with David Reisher really, really trying and busting his butt to kind of make things work when it comes to Lyft, both not only on the rider side, now charging people less, but on the driver side as well, introducing more bonuses. I did a video, I think last week or whatever, talking about the new earnings model with Lyft, how they're stating, based on all their statistics and analytics, Lyft drivers are now making more than before. Now, granted, is it like it was a few years ago or even before the pandemic? No. But if you look at a lot of the numbers, and I'm a very numbers-driven person, I think there's never been a better time to be a Lyft driver. It is tough to say, though, what's going to happen, because as we know, when it comes to Uber, you may be saying, well, Mark, take that ride that I took. Uber ride, $45. Lyft ride, $26. Unfortunately, now, if this was 7 or 8 years ago, I'd say, of course, if you did that Uber ride, you make more money, right? The Uber ride costs more. Mathematically, that makes sense. But as we all know, Uber and Lyft works a lot different now the way it used to, where just because a ride costs a lot of money doesn't mean the driver gets to pocket that profit. Something we know all too well when it comes to rideshare driving. But I think Lyft is really trying to make it work with a lot of drivers, with bonuses, with incentives, and just in general paying them a lot better than they were before. And so I think right now, especially with everything going on, this to me is a very unique thing where even though Uber had a great quarter and a lot of people are like, hey, Uber's doing great, they're very profitable and all this kind of stuff now. It's funny how there's an asterisk on that being like, yeah, Uber's doing great, but Lyft is starting to pick up steam. Lyft is starting to do a lot. And as you can imagine, the better Lyft starts doing, the better it is for the drivers and the riders. Because I think we can all agree when it comes to the friendlier or the nicer or the more just intimate, if that's the right word, app, Lyft tends to be the more favorite. If I mentioned this before in other videos, they did do a study and survey. They found when it comes to drivers, they find Lyft tend to be the friendlier company compared to Uber, which is more business driven and everything like that. So I'm telling you, when it comes to all the drivers out there, I think there's never been a better time to drive for Lyft, or at least start, right? Make sure you test out the waters. Like I mentioned, that's the biggest thing. You can start driving for Lyft, like say now, or like say drive for them a little bit more on the weekends and realize, you know what, Uber's still paying more. That could be very likely. Remember, your location is the number one factor that determines how much money you make as a driver. But it is interesting. I gotta say, this is the first time I've seen throughout all the reports of Lyft versus Uber, because there's been a lot of reports I've covered of people saying, oh, Lyft is starting to do some good things. But this is the first report I've seen, maybe in the past year or so, when it comes to Uber versus Lyft, that there's been some comments being like, all right, before it used to be Uber's better than Lyft. That used to be the comments across the board. Now it's, okay, Uber's doing well, but so is Lyft. So things are getting interesting.